Although most mobile games never survive past the first 6 to 9 months, Rise of Kingdoms has now been around for over 3 years. But will Rise of Kingdoms last for 5 years? 10 years? I mean, I've spent over $80,000 on my Rise of Kingdoms account at this point, so obviously I want the game to do well. But how can we know for sure? Is the game doing well or not? And what could kill Rise of Kingdoms as a game? Man, let's talk about it. Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I'm Chisgule Gaming, and every now and then people get kind of up in arms and leave these comments like the game is dying and it'll never survive. And I just kind of wondered, is there a way for us to know? Because you see, I have made a YouTube channel fully dedicated to Rise of Kingdoms content, daily content about Rise of Kingdoms, except when I'm like sick or have some crazy, real life obligations that interfere with my making a video in advance. But if Rise of Kingdoms were to die, I would actually be in trouble. I'd need to find another game to play. So as a content creator, I needed to find a way for sure to know, is Rise of Kingdoms still relevant or not? Now, there's a couple things that I look at, and there's a couple things that I think could kill Rise of Kingdoms at some point, and I want to talk about those. And there's also things that I think could make Rise of Kingdoms really grow in popularity. I'll talk about that too. The things that I frequently look at to figure out if Rise of Kingdoms is good, and you can see I've got my 1,308 days consecutive login. And yes, like I've not skipped a day of Rise of Kingdoms, literally. Here are the things I look at to see if the game is doing well. First, you can obviously look at the app rank in the App Store. Currently, Rise of Kingdoms is 27 for iPad. When I looked last night, it was 33. This bounces up and down and has often kind of hovered in that like 20 to 30 range. Sometimes is better, sometimes it's worse. But this is not really a great way of measuring how healthy the game is, I think, at any moment in time. And I'll also add that I also don't think that player sentiment is necessarily representative of the reality of how the game is performing. But let me show you the thing that actually can tell you, not just a couple people's opinions, but globally, how relevant Rise of Kingdoms is or is not. This is Google Trends. This is really helpful for seeing how a phrase is performing over time relative to itself or to other things. So for example, let's just enter Rise of Kingdoms into the search. Let's make the time horizon the past 5 years. The game hasn't been out for 5 years, but you can see over time, the game has been searched more and the game has been searched less. And the way that this tool works is it shows you the level of interest relative to this game. In other words, you score a 100 when it is the most searched the game has ever been. And at this point, let's see, right now we're scoring somewhere between probably 35 and 40 right over here. So compared to when it was searched the most, now we're at about 35% of that amount of search interest on Google. Now, this is kind of a cool way to look at things. And for those of you that have been around for a while, you know, by the way, that the game actually changed names. So we need to add Rise of Civilizations, the original name. And you can see when they swapped, Rise of Kingdoms rises as a term. And that launch date right over here is about when I started playing. Let's see here. September timeframe is around when I started playing Rise of Kingdoms. Now, there have been many times in Rise of Kingdoms history where players freak out saying that the game is going to die. And yet, the data tells an extremely different story. In fact, there have been no moments in time, really, in the history of this game that show a drop so significant as to say, yep, the game is dying, we're never going to make it. And in case you were wondering, what are these spikes of interest? There's 3 of them. The one all the way over here, this is just COVID. People were spending more time inside. And so, yeah, they were playing more mobile games. More people started searching for Rise of Kingdoms. The one over here, I did a look for this as well. If you had to guess what happened around, let's see here, May 30th, 2021, pause the video if you want, see if you can figure out what would cause such a spike in interest in Rise of Kingdoms. But I'll tell you in just a second. This was the release of Vikings to the game. So the release of Vikings to Rise of Kingdoms was one of the most popular and relevant, I guess, things the game has done. It drew more interest than any of the other advertising campaigns that they did. More people started searching Rise of Kingdoms. And the next peak over here, it's a double peak, and that's because there's really sort of two things that happened in quick succession. One, if you had to guess, what was it? I'll tell you the time frame, and then you can take a guess. Pause the video if you want. Right over here. It won't let me select the exact time, but basically the end of December into the start of January. The two major things that happened were the release of Sea Battles and also the release of Nevsky. So that got a major spike in interest, and I would say then a minor spike in interest. Really, I think Naval Battles is what got a lot of attention, and this may be in part because of a advertising campaign push as well. And then things have kind of tapered off back down to sort of a more normal level. And I would say that the slight drop that we've seen over like the last year or so relative to when it was kind of over here is probably just related to life getting back to normal for a lot of people and spending less time on mobile games. I mean, heck, we're coming into springtime now. I'm personally spending a lot more time outside than I was before. I know, Chisgule sees the light of day, crazy. But really nothing about this graph says to me that Rise of Kingdoms is a game that is dying. But if we took a look at a game that actually has really dropped off in interest, as an example, or a game that was more of like a fad, for example, you want to compare here, let's look at Pokemon Go. How often is that searched? First of all, I find it hilarious that the amount of searching for Pokemon Go makes Rise of Kingdoms be or look just like completely irrelevant. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of like the size of Pokemon Go. And if we just look over a long time horizon here, this is much more of what it looks like for a game to suddenly lose a ton of interest. This is a fad where it was insanely popular, and it's still, as you saw, insanely popular. Or if we want to look at another mobile game here, I have to remove this to be able to even see any other thing here. We can look at a game like Clash of Clans. I mean, when we look at this graph for Clash of Clans, like you can see the interest spiked way higher than Rise of Kingdoms ever was, which is actually kind of shocking when we try to compare these things. And Clash of Clans has now dropped way, way down to a point, by the way, that is still much more searched than Rise of Kingdoms, which is like kind of surprising because Rise of Kingdoms is a large popular game, but so many people play and continue to play Clash of Clans that like the interest level is very high. I'll add one or two other comparison points just because I think it's kind of interesting here. If we get a look at a game like Lords Mobile, which is another like city building war game, that is performing pretty similarly to Rise of Kingdoms. In fact, you could, well, I don't know, it's gone up and it's gone down a little bit, right? Like interest has waned a little bit, but like it's not completely dropped off. And you can see that the advertising campaigns for Rise of Kingdoms have really been very successful, I would argue, in bringing a large amount of attention to the game. But all of this kind of shows you some examples of the fact that like, I don't think the game is dying. And I don't think it's going to die anytime soon. And I would argue that in a worst case, the game might taper off in terms of interest over the course of the next 2 years. But if the developers can find things that bring people back to the game and then keep them interested in the game, or they come up with new things that are really exciting and fun, you could see like a really big surge of interest, which is why I think the release of the next civilization into the game is going to be just a massive, massive thing for Rise of Kingdoms. I think the developers know this, and I think they're going for another one of these massive spikes when they release a new civilization. That has to be what they're going for, and they're probably, if I had to guess, going to try to tie into another movie or really popular thing that a lot of people know about. And so all these theories I've heard about maybe it's Egypt, to me, sound extremely viable for a new civilization because there are so many movies and things about Egypt that they could tie into that would be extremely popular. So what are the things that I think could actually kill Rise of Kingdoms? Like actually a sort of thing that could take out the game and people would stop playing it. And The first obvious thing we'd have to talk about is some new competitor that makes a better city building war game. And how do you even define better? The thing that's difficult here is that Rise of Kingdoms has now had years to make the experience of playing better. And although there are still problems with things like lag spikes and difficulty fighting in like really large battles where marches will ghost and then you start walking one way, but the march is actually on your screen the other way. And there's like things like that are problematic. But I think unless there's a competitor that does it better, I don't think people are leaving Rise of Kingdoms necessarily because of that. I think you could make a game that is more free-to-play friendly. In fact, I will make the argument that compared to the other city-building war games, I know people are going to think it's crazy, but I'll tell you, I've played a bunch of them, and Rise of Kingdoms is a lot more free-to-play friendly, and also to get things maxed out in this game, it is a lot less money than it would take compared to other games. That might sound crazy, but like, go try some of the other mobile city building war games out there and you will see what I mean very quickly. So I think the way that you beat Rise of Kingdoms is you make a better free-to-play experience and you make it cheaper to max out all the things that you would want to max. And then you try to make a bunch of money off of things like cosmetics that don't actually significantly impact the gameplay experience, but just give you a bunch of flair. And I think that in and of itself is how you would make a game that actually could tackle Rise of Kingdoms. Also, I will say the thing that Rise of Kingdoms does well compared to some other games, I know this is going to sound crazy because you could spend a lot of time playing Rise of Kingdoms, but it really respects your time. Trust me when I say there are games that have a lot more grind than Rise of Kingdoms. And I think that in the grand scheme of things, the more that a game respects your time, so you can do the fun things you want to do, the better off you are with a game, well, that takes up just a lot of your time in general. There really is one last important thing I want to talk about when it comes to the longevity of Rise of Kingdoms, and that is the KVK experience, which in my eyes, that is the end game and has to be the bread and butter of what makes this game better than any other option. I mean, this is the big show. You build up for what purpose? It's this, baby. It's KVK. And I get there's Osiris kingdoms and there's KVK kingdoms. I get that those are two different ideas. I will express one area of concern with things that have happened in the game leading up to this point. And that is the new KVK formats that we've gotten. Now, Heroic Anthem, solid format. Strife of the Eight. Hey, there's things I would change, but actually like pretty solid and people want to play it. But I gotta be honest, and we talk about March of the Ages, which is no longer even here, and then also Desert Conquest KVK, which like even if I wanted to play this, the overwhelming sentiment in every kingdom I'm in is I will not play Desert Conquest. And if you choose it as a kingdom, I'm migrating or I'm quitting, right? Like as long as those are sentiments that players hold, this to me is a little bit of an area of concern. I mean, if we're being honest, right? Like these last two KVK formats that we got in the game were a miss. And March of the Ages was so much of a miss that they actually removed it from the game, and maybe it'll come back at some point in some new flavor that people do want to play. And Desert Conquest, I get that it was released with the intention of kind of like learning and then we tweak it. But the problem is that it's gotten such a reputation now that, like, I don't know. I mean, people maybe they pick it. I think the thing that is most likely to kill Rise of Kingdoms is a slow decline in interest in the end game if the developers cannot release new KVK formats that everybody is extremely excited to play. I mean, at least once a year, we should see a new flavor of KVK that is so exciting and different and cool that we all want to try it, and it needs to be fun, right? And it doesn't need to be even all that crazy. Like, if you just made a new map that was a 1v1 KVK, like, people would be really interested in that. Or if you made a map that was designed to be like a 3v3 KVK, we don't have one of those. Just something interesting, something different, something that has replayability, but a little bit of variety. Like, for example, Heroic Anthem has bastions. Like, honestly, you could copy the Heroic Anthem bastion system, change the map around to be for a different number of kingdoms. And I think people will be excited about that and happy to play it. I know like a lot of kingdoms want to do a 1v1 and to be able to like challenge another kingdom and call them out and both kingdoms agree. Like, I think there's a cool opportunity there, maybe, for a new KVK format. So to summarize, I don't think there's really been a moment in Rise of Kingdoms history where I would say the game has actually been dying or in trouble. Players may feel that way, but the data that we were just looking at tells a very different story. Yeah, there's local minimums and maximums. A little interest drop. I mean, interest rises and drops with the time of the year when more people are inside or outside. Like, that's not that big of a deal. I would say that's normal for any game. So I plan to be playing Rise of Kingdoms for a really long time because I don't think it's going anywhere. I think it's a safe bet to say that I'll probably be playing 2 years from now. I want to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. And if you like videos that speculate on the future of Rise of Kingdoms and also gives you tips, tricks, and guides to play the game better, consider subscribing. I plan to be maxing new CPO the day that he lands on my restart account. I'm going to be testing new CPO with Trajan and CJ and all these other commanders on my restart account in a day from now. So subscribe so you don't miss that. Throw a like on here. And if you're looking for another video predicting the future of Rise of Kingdoms, I'll have a card up in the top showcasing my predictions for this entire year of 2022. And until next time, you have fun smashing your enemies.